Today I'm going to be discussing the information for the idea that we've been visited by ancient astronauts in the past. Many of you might be familiar with the work of Eric von Daniken or Zacharias Sitchin, main proponents, people who have been putting out the idea that all the ancient cultures and the knowledge that they gained wasn't just through the natural progression of evolution and time, that we were actually influenced, and that, if you want to call them star beings, people from the heavens, have influenced our primitive cultures and even up to this day. So just going around, what I'll do is kind of explain my own interest and how I got started in this field just briefly. As a college student, I became very fascinated with the possible artificial structures on Mars and NASA's explanation for these images, which then led me to start to look at all the other megalithic monuments all over the Earth, like Stonehenge and, of course, our famous Giza, where the Sphinx and the pyramids are located, but many other archaeological sites around the world, again, showing some interesting stuff with Egypt, which I'll leave up to Mr. John Anthony West to fill you in on today. But many of these megalithic structures all over the world displayed a type of brilliance or a technology that we today still cannot even duplicate. For instance, these stones that we're looking at here, these were stones quarried in Baalbek in Lebanon, and you can see that, I believe that's Ted actually, isn't it? So that's Ted standing there on this stone, and these are called trilithiton stones. These are stones that weigh in the thousands of tons range, and you can see that they were quarried here and then taken 5 miles away and stacked. Here's another picture of a gentleman standing there, and they were stacked perfectly here. Now, we don't have technology today, even today, that can cut that precise of a block and wedge something in there and lift it out and take it 5 miles away. So it's very interesting that we have this type of evidence all over the world. And for me, it started to really raise the question as to, okay, well, if we don't attribute technology and high mathematics and science to some of these primitive cultures, where do they get this knowledge from? So that starts to lead into the questions that many of the things that are looked upon as mythology, these stories that have been passed down from ancient cultures, are these myths, or did this stuff actually take place? So where this led me to was the very first culture we have record of on Earth, and this was called Sumeria, also known as Mesopotamia and Babylon in various ensuing periods. But the first culture that we have record of came out of modern-day Iraq, then called Sumeria 6,000 years ago. And what's so amazing about the Sumerian culture is it's literally one of the most advanced cultures we have record of, and they come right out of the Stone Age. And so we really have this track record of evolution of civilizations kind of going up and down and to the point where we are now. But the very first culture that we have record of was the Sumerian culture. Now, the Sumerian culture, again, as I said, located in Iraq. If you look here, this is a little map of what was then called Mesopotamia. This fertile strip of land here now is now known as Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates. And the Sumerian culture were the first, they invented over 100 of the firsts for a civilization of high society to take place. Many of the things that they invented and were the first ones to show evidence of being using these things that we'll discuss, they were the first ones to come up with this. Some of that being math, science, medicine, astronomy, astrology even. All of these originated in Sumeria. Here, another thing that originated in Sumeria was, of course, writing. And this is a tablet where they wrote. Unfortunately, we can't see it that clearly. But what it was called is cuneiform writing. And the cuneiform language of the Sumerians consisted of over 400 characters. They'd use a wedged-shaped object and twist it and turn it and make all these lines and symbols consisting of over 400 characters. So obviously, we wouldn't be able to have writing or any of the things without this first development of this system. Sometimes the Sumerians would also write on semi-precious stones, marble, granite, even sometimes gold, to pass down very sacred information. And the knowledge that the Sumerians had, specifically, for instance, just of mathematics alone, this is a diagram here. This is actually a diagram shown in one of Zacharias Sitchin's books. Zacharias Sitchin is a linguist, about 82 years old now, has spent the last 50 years researching the Sumerian lexicon of information. So this diagram just shows the fact that the Sumerians had very accurate knowledge of geometry and algebra and could do very small equations in very large areas, like we see here, very complex shapes. They were the first ones to denote 360 degrees in a circle, and all of the mathematics bequeathed by the Sumerian culture we still use today. And interestingly enough, they had a base math of 60. Again, being able to do very complicated, fine-tuned, small calculations in very large numbers as well. You'd think it'd be 10 or 5, but no, actually it was a hexadecimal system of 60. Very complicated. So again, the knowledge that the Sumerians had has been further authenticated with all the artifacts that they've left us. These are artifacts which I'm going to be showing which are still stored in the British Museum and the Louvre in Paris. Yes. Can we focus that? That's a good question. But while Ted's working his magic there, we'll kind of continue on. This is a tablet, one of several held in the British Museum. And the Sumerians were very astute in recording not only their daily events, but their interaction with what they called their living gods, and as well as just all the various activities that were taking place in their time. They had what they called cylinder seals, and I'll show you a description of one in a moment, but it was kind of like your modern-day printing press. They would take this little cylinder seal and carve a reverse imprint. And they still don't know how they did this today. They still don't know. They carved a reverse imprint on this little seal and then would roll it out in wet clay, leaving the positive imprint. And so they could roll out these little clay tablets, stick them in a kiln, firing them with heat, making into stone, and they could disseminate all these little tablets throughout the village very quickly to get out information. This one tablet that we're looking at here basically just describes natural weather occurrences and patterns of storms and observations over hundreds of years that they recorded these events, meaning it wasn't just kind of like a day or two or a week. They were very accurate in over hundreds of years recorded this knowledge. This is another tablet that shows at what points in certain times of the year different star constellations would be in the sky, which I'll discuss more in a moment. But very interestingly, the Sumerians were the first ones to divide the heavens into 12 parts, which we now know as the 12 houses of the zodiac. Those constellations that you see for each house of the zodiac, the Sumerians were the first ones to originate this information. And here's another tablet that shows observations of Venus. And again, this is over 4,000 years old, and this is the information that they have recorded on stone and is unchanged to this day. So you start to kind of wonder, wow, this is pretty interesting, elaborate writing system, talking about some pretty esoteric things having to do with space. How did they learn all this? Which we'll discuss in a moment. Now here is a cylinder seal. This is a little round, semi-precious stone, and I'm sorry this isn't clear for you folks, but what would happen is they would roll it out on the clay and get the positive imprint. What we're kind of seeing here, and I do have some clearer ones in a moment, but these are what the Sumerians called Anunnaki, and it's the term that they gave to their gods that lived among them. Anunnaki means those who from heaven come to earth. Now I'm going to state real quickly here that all the information I'm about to show you or that we're going to be seeing, the Sumerians were the first ones of the Sumerians were the originators of many of the biblical tales, many of the stories that we now have in English in the Old Testament or in Hebrew from the Old Testament version and the New Testament version. All of these stories can be transgressed to the first original Sumerian version still in stone. A Noah's Ark, a great flood, the 7 days of creation, all of that are proponents that actually came from the original Sumerian information, which I'll show you here in a minute. So here is another semi-precious stone that shows a Sumerian king talking to another Sumerian. And interestingly enough, we see some symbology here of a winged disc and a crescent moon, which we'll be discussing in a moment. But if this was a little clearer, you could see that this is all writing throughout here, telling a very esoteric story, and they were very detailed with their information. So aside from just the normal daily events